I bring a chalice lighting in that I don't think I've ever given a talk. It always turns into a sermon. And this comes from the Reverend Thomas Anastasi, who served one of our congregations in the Pacific Northwest, Shoreline Unitarian Universalist Church. And Shoreline, if you're ever, come on out. I welcome you to come on out and visit. And I would take you to go worship at Shoreline because I understand from last night how important music is to you. And at Shoreline UU congregation, just north of Seattle, music is so important to them that when they decided to, well, they had to build a new building, they were just way too big, they built an acoustically perfect geodesic dome. So they're an example of how their building followed mission, not the other way around. And they stretched and they asked for help from area congregations, and we were happy to oblige because we knew what that goodness was going to come out of that congregation. And what they found is in that acoustically perfect geodesic dome is the music is absolutely amazing. And at coffee hour, they found, when you are talking in a corner, you know what's coming. When you're talking in a corner, the people in the other corner, actually there isn't a corner in a dome, is there? But the people across the dome from you can hear what's going on. So now there is a beautiful accountability that goes on there. So not only are they known as the congregation where music lives large, but also covenant and right relations lives large. So please hear the words, receive the words of Reverend Thomas Anastasi. Let's come together and make a deal. Everyone who is willing to make an almighty risk. Let's get together and propose a stunning bargain, a daring contract for the world. And we human beings can participate in this meaning. That's the gospel. There is worth and dignity within us and among us, and when we congregate, true community is possible. And there's more, siblings. There is more. There is worth and dignity within us and among us, and our beloved relations extend beyond our walls, all the way out to the whole world and the cosmos, this most excellent interdependence of all existence. This is cause for celebration. Let's get together and get busy. Let us sing spiritual songs and clap our hands and dance dances to the living rhythms of the earth and the sky. There is so much to experience, to learn, to hope. And when we join together, the odds toward goodness multiply. When we join together, the odds toward goodness multiply. As the circle enlarges, the numbers cannot keep pace, the group larger by leaps bounding. Come, come whoever you are, let us grow together. My name is Tandi, and I am an evangelical, born-again, Unitarian Universalist. That's right. I'm an evangelical because when I open up the newspaper and I read all the despair, the isolation, the consumerism, the narcissism, when I read what some of our politicians are saying and doing, I think, if only they had taken OWL. You know what I'm talking about. OWL is our whole lives. It's our sexuality curriculum. And before you think that I'm getting all cheeky, because yes, many of our politicians could really use OWL, it's in the tabloids. OWL is not just about sex. OWL is about what does it mean to be alive in the world? What does it mean to be responsible? You learn consensus, how to build consensus, how to build consensual relationships, how to be in right relationship. So again, I open up the newspaper and I think, what if our leaders only took OWL? And I look at our congregation, some of them really, really struggling, and I think, oh, what if they had OWL? I know my life would be different. I think of myself as growing up in a small town in northern Ohio, very small. Had no idea what Unitarian Universalism was, but I knew that somewhere I needed to get out as soon as possible, and somewhere there really was Sesame Street, and I was going to find it and build it. But I think, what if I had had OWL? Can you imagine what your life would be like? How many of you got to grow up in a Unitarian Universalist church? Oh, I am so jealous. And for those of you who didn't have the opportunity, oh my goodness, what would our life be like if we'd only have grown up in a Unitarian Universalist church? So that's why I'm evangelical. I watch my kids grow up and I think, oh my gosh, they are so far beyond what I was at their age, and I want that opportunity for everybody. So yes, I am that crazy lady in the grocery store who invites people in line ahead and behind her to church on Sunday. And I'm that person who sits on the plane, and by the end, when I'm buddies with the person sitting next to me, and sure enough, I have to call the minister where I'm landing to say, so-and-so is coming to church on Sunday. And what this does is it makes me be very aware. It just releases my total church geek, because I need to know your stories. I need to know who I am inviting these strangers to. And I have to admit that sometimes I know that there's a congregation in whatever town I'm in, and sometimes I will invite that person to our largest congregation instead. I will explain to them and write down the website for Church of the Larger Fellowship. Because here is the sad truth, is I don't want somebody seeking out a political group or a social club who has Unitarian Universalism in their sign out front, if they have a sign. I don't want them going there and thinking that that is Unitarian Universalism when their heart and their life depends on it. And that gets me up in the morning. I can't wait. My goal is at the end of my life, I will not have to worry about that at all. I will just say, you know what, there is a Unitarian Universalist church in your town because we've got them everywhere. Healthy, vibrant, can't wait to get up in the morning. So that's why I'm a Unitarian. That's why I'm an evangelical. And not only do I invite random people to church, I also, out in the Pacific Northwest, we have just so much land and only 60 congregations in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. So I just can't plant them quick enough. So we've got them sprouting up all over. And I think someone at the UUA said, okay, we're going to open up this growth office. We might as well have Tandi come. She's going to do it anyway. So I'm grateful. And I also want to hold up that it was important to the office to have a religious educator there. Someone once asked me, I was doing political work, and someone once asked, what is your orientation? And I know why they asked. Now I know why they asked. They asked because they'd known me as married to a man before, and my partner's a woman. So they were kind of confused, going, now, what is your orientation? It was lost on me. I said, well, religious educator. I said, no. What is your orientation? I'm like, religious educator. Because it's everything I do, and if you think about it, okay, if you're growing, you've got to be learning. If you aren't learning, then that growth is only going to take you so far, and then you'll be in decline. So that's why it's important for me to really lead with that religious education, and I invite you to think about that and do the same. So the Growth Office strategy, people keep asking us, what's the strategy? What's your strategy? And it's very similar to the vision that Peter Morales cast for us at the beginning of his time. Get religion, grow leaders, cross borders. Get religion, grow leaders, cross borders. So out of that, Stephen Jonason Stephen Jonason is the head of the Growth Office. He is in the Metro New York District Assembly right now, giving a speech on growth also. We're going to be comparing notes later, see how that works. We are starting learning circles, and I'm going to give you these strategies from a growth office, but I invite you to do them in your area as well. And I know actually we borrowed some of your ideas. I will just say that up front. We are starting what's called innovative learning circles. So we're gathering the folks in the field who are doing some really wonderful thinking and some risking, because we found that so often those innovative learners can be isolated. And that's just not good for anybody. I think if our saving message is anything, it's that you are not alone. So we are going to gather those innovative learners using technology, being able to do that virtually, gather them in small group ministry circles so that they can unpack what does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist leader in a postmodern world. What ideas are working, and how can they learn from each other? And I know you've got your clusters going on. I know Sue Cinnamon is doing some learning circles as well. So we'll be in partnership with that. We're also supporting emerging congregations. Right now, there isn't a definite pathway to becoming a congregation. Out in the Pacific Northwest, we learned from the Leap of Faith program that having a mentor congregation is really important. So we are using, for every emerging congregation that comes up, a group that starts to form and say, hey, would like to be on the path to be a member in the association. Then we are putting them with a mentor congregation who's a little bit farther ahead. And what we found is, they have to be, have a minister and be a solid congregation. And what we're finding is that the mentor congregations are growing as well. One of our breakthrough congregations, the first one, which is Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship out in Port Townsend, Washington. They were a small, I know, whoop, whoop. I'm seeing Jean in the back going, yeah. They were a smaller congregation when they first became a breakthrough when that program started. They are now a larger mid-sized congregation, and they have just discerned that part of their identity is as not just a teaching congregation to interns, but as a mentor congregation to brand new congregations. So they are starting to, they've got 2 congregations that they're working with now who are on the pathway to becoming an associational member, excuse me. And I encourage you to pick that up also. What are the smaller congregations around your congregation that might benefit from being mentored? And the mentor congregation they're finding, they come to me a little embarrassed and say, we think that we're learning more than they are. That's just good learning. That is good learning. And then leverage points also. What's working that we can just tweak a little bit and make it even better? I'm doing a lot of work with Keith Cron in the interim ministers. So coaching them, because interim ministry, how many of you have had an interim minister within the last 5 years? You know that is a wonderful time for growth. That's a leverage point. That's where you get your that time when you get your crowbar in and you reassess what is your identity and how do we get ready for a settled minister. So we're acknowledging that as a prime growth time. Now, Stephen Jonason is, if you ever have the chance to meet him, is a walking encyclopedia. He knows our history in and out, and is just a fantastic storyteller. And so I have the benefit of picking his brain constantly. And what he did over last summer is he pulled out archive upon archive of all the past growth efforts, initiatives of the UUA. And he was looking for what are the patterns, what are the trends. And what I really appreciate is he didn't ask the question, why did they fail, period. He asked, why might they have not been as effective at this time? When could they be effective again? When might we dust them off and reassess them, reuse them, pull them out and use them in a different way? So we were looking at what worked, what didn't work for its time, and what might we consider. What he found in all the different initiatives is the magic 7 kept popping up. That growth initiatives, both in our congregations and then at an institutional level, have about a life cycle of 7 years. So think about that. I like to hold up the example of the church auction. I used to do development work, and I found that by about year 6, that auction just started feeling like the albatross rather than that time to do the auction, woohoo! So, what other programs are kind of like, oh my gosh, it's that time of year, we've got to do this again. And invite you to think about, do you really have to do that again? Maybe not. Maybe not. So anytime something starts feeling like a should, here's my growth strategy for you, stop doing it. And then see what people miss. And maybe if people really, really miss it, get right with what was the intention, what was the purpose, what did people get out of that event or that ritual, and bring it back in a fresh way that meets the needs of this time. In the paper that Reverend Peter Morales put out, The Congregations and Beyond, how many of you have seen that paper, or at least heard of it? Okay. At the very core of it, it's the Congregations and Beyond paper, the concept, is asking us, what does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist in a postmodern world? In a world where technical fixes are not adequate, where we don't know everything, we can't know everything, and we really need to surrender that notion. The concept of we only serve the people within our congregations, and the only way to be a Unitarian Universalist is within our congregations, that's an old notion. So he's kicking down that side of the box for us so that we can examine, what does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist today? What does it mean to be a member of a religious community, whether it be a congregation or a cooperative housing or a coffee shop group that meets constantly over years and holds each other through transitions? They're asking the question of, what does it mean to be a religious community? And who do we serve? Who do we serve? Now, the growing congregations, I have come to find out, especially through the breakthrough congregations, if I ask them, who do you serve? They will start talking about the communities outside their walls. And some of them can even tell me what those numbers are, because they're evaluating and collecting numbers to make sure that they are doing what they intend to do, that they are making the impact that they intend to make. And I'll cover numbers in a little bit. So in the paper, there were some assumptions made about who the free-range Unitarian Universalists are. And when I say free range, please do not be offended. I am not calling people outside of our congregations chickens at all. But the free rangers, so those 400,000 people out there who call themselves Unitarian Universalists, who identify with our faith, but are not within our congregations. Now, some assumptions are made that most of those people are young adults, and many of those people are people who have never been within our congregations. How many people have that? Oh, you are. It's a very, very big assumption, and we have built entire programs around it. So I put out a little, now I have to really state up front and look in the camera, this is not a scientific survey. I just needed to know to make sure that I was putting our time, talent, treasure into a correct assumption. So I used SurveyMonkey, and I threw it out there in social media, and I kind of watched it bounce around. And at first I thought, well, it's not really scientific, and I've got to be really careful because these are all people who are connected to me in some way. But then in the month that followed, it took off on its own. So within the first, we had about 250 people within the first couple weeks, and then by when the month time passed, we had over 500 people who logged in, and I collected a lot of the demographics that we're often afraid to collect. So I asked their ethnic identity, I asked their age, I asked, education, I collected zip codes, and age, sexual orientation, gender identity. If you ever do a survey like this, I think long and hard about how much qualitative data you use. I am still filtering because when I asked for some of the identities, I asked them with an open question. How do you identify? And I'm so glad I did that, because when I did a cross-filter, cross-reference with the age, there is just so clear that our older generations, I'm 44, my generation and above, we're really comfortable with the little boxes. The youngers, there is no box. There is no box, but a whole lot of really, really rich data. Okay, so what I found age-wise, we have 13 to 73, flat line, except for a little blip at age 24. Statistically insignificant, less than 5%, little blip. Flat line, okay? It's like, well, that's really interesting. Okay. So the question of how many of you have ever gone to a Unitarian Universalist church, are familiar with it, have been a member? Of that 500, 75% have been members of Unitarian Universalist congregations before. Okay. And here's where our justice imperative really rubber hits the road. And this is why I love numbers, okay? I am one of those church geeks who I pore over numbers. There are times when you can come up to me and just throw congregations, and I will be able to tell you what their 10-year projections have been, because it helps me figure out better questions. I have to be real clear with that. I love numbers because they help me break my assumptions. They help me figure out if we're doing what we intend to do. And I also know in these cases that these are real people. So when I'm looking over those numbers, I have a chalice lit, and I'm holding those numbers prayerfully. What I found is, okay, so throughout the number, about what percentage of the population are GBLT? About, throughout a number. Yeah, general population. 10 to 15%, right. Of the free rangers who have already been in our congregations, over half of them are queer. So for those congregations who are having the argument of, or having the debate as to whether being a welcoming congregation matters, it does. It does. Siblings in faith, it does. There are people who are trying to find you whose lives really do depend on it. So please keep that in mind. Please keep that in mind. Half. And those of you who have gone through the welcoming congregation, that's a continuous process. I mean, if you're taking an OWL class, oh my gosh, the OWL teachers have to keep getting up on new information because it's changing constantly. And for each generation, what it means to be a man or a woman or all the spectrum of in between, that gender identity, it's not like it was when we grew up, okay? And there is just beauty coming into our walls, coming into our doors if we welcome in. So please continue to do that work. The other statistic that really sits hard with me is, okay, of the 575, and I'm still teasing out, okay, so 500, I'm still going through the list, the qualitative data, but well over half of that 75% were also past ministers, directors of religious education, huge proportion, huge, former presidents. I saw that and I started weeping. And I think of my own congregation. So I've been a member of my congregation for almost 25 years. And I sat through and made a list of all the presidents that I have been blessed with and held by over the years, and well over half of them don't grace our doors anymore. And I know full well nobody ever called them up. We miss you. Come back. And what they were reporting, so then I give them a section, what haven't I asked you that you want to tell me? And boy, did people tell me stuff. Over and over again, people would say about how they'd served the congregation, they love our faith, they wanted to grow that congregation, and they left in shame. They left because they felt like they disappointed people. They left because there was a public argument and they were took to task. That doesn't sound like a religious community, does it to you? But yet, here we eat our young. We eat our old. We eat each other up. Can we stop doing that, please? Seriously, there's a growth strategy. Let's stop shaming people. Let's stop analyzing things to death. Let's find ways to support. I want to tell you a fun story. There was a congregation who the board was having just awful in my district. We'll call them East Cupcake. I'm not going to tell you who they are. But they were having one of those public, the board did not get along at all. They would have screaming matches in the middle of board meetings. they would take it into the sanctuary and just, you could feel there was something chilly about it. And then they would post stuff about it in their minutes and put it in the newsletter, which is online, and other congregations read it. One of the area congregations was reading it at their next board meeting, brought it up and said, you know what, I think we need to go to East Cupcake for an intervention. I'm like, there you go, please do. I am so sad that they didn't. The president did call the other president and say, what can we do to help? That's our congregational polity in action. That is our congregational polity right there. They're holding each other accountable. So this congregation, who is just at odds, they were doing small group ministry. And part of the small group ministry program, I don't know if you all do this, in small group ministry, one of the requirements is that they have a service project. And most of the groups were doing things like tending the garden or fixing up these kind of things and doing a little bit of work over here. One of the groups said, you know what? They sat in the real discernment, prayerful discernment as to what is it that our religious community needs. And they came to the conclusion that the board needed somebody to hold them. So they became the Chalice Fairies. They actually had members calling up the administrator. Okay, Andy, we can't tell you who this is, but would you please ask the minister there, is the minister in the office? Yeah, okay. Would you ask the minister what her favorite color is? No, I can't tell you who this is. Oh, okay, thanks. And then like a week later, a prayer shawl with a note that says, this prayer shawl looks more like a scarf so that you can wear it and people will just know, and people don't need to know that you're wearing a prayer shawl. But it's a prayer shawl that's been blessed by our group, and we just want you to know that we admire your work and we love you, and when you wear it, you'll have superpowers to let all the mucky stuff fall off. And then the Chalice Fairies also would make sure that there were little notes in the board members' boxes, and on Valentine's Day, they'd get Valentine's cards, and they would send little notes and say, we know that you're meeting at 5 o'clock on Thursday, just know that the Chalice Fairies are praying for you. And they would get together, they'd light a chalice, and they would pray for their board. Now, how do you explain to people that that's a growth strategy? But I'm here to tell you that it really is. They're acting like a religious community and acting like what we do matters. Yeah, and it made a big difference, made a huge difference in that congregation. And the Chalice Fairies reported that they loved the minister wore that scarf everywhere. And there was like a little spring in her step. And it was kind of fun to watch. She'd kind of, when things would get heated, she'd fling it a little bit. So these growth strategies, when I look at a growth strategy, the people love to show me now in the growth office, like, oh, we'll show the growth strategy specialist our strategic plan that is so slick and fancy. And those things I find to be so boring, honestly. What I love are the growth strategies that are like covert. Those kind of strategies where you've got a twinkle in your eye and you think, all right, I'm feeling spirit, I'm feeling powerful, where can I pass that along? And then it just kind of flows out, that multiplication thing, okay? We are wildly powerful beyond our imaginations. So think about where are your gifts? What are the things that you love to do? Maybe you've got a fantastic garden and you just want to surprise some of the tired leaders with little flowers every so often planted around. Give them a little potted plant or fresh flowers on the minister's desk. Maybe you bake really good cookies. Pass that around. Maybe you know, oh, and here's a blessed multiplier. Maybe you know the names of all the children in your congregation. Use their names and greet them. Say hello. It is dry in here. Everybody make sure you're drinking lots of water. All right. Now I am not afraid to admit that sometimes, especially when I'm really, really tired and there's a lot going on, I like a list. I like a magic list that I can look at and go, okay, I only have to do blah, 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 and then magic is going to happen. Wouldn't that be great? Well, we gathered in, was it 5 years ago? 5 years ago, the growth team, and I was on Bill Sinkford's growth team at the time. We gathered 12 ministers from all over the association, and these were dynamic ministers that just made you go, wow, what are they on? Well, we wanted to find out what they were on, and we gathered them up for a weekend of deep listening. We produced a DVD out of it. We taped everything that went on. We had an outside facilitator. They did a fishbowl exercise where the minister sat in a circle in the middle, and the growth team, we sat on the outside, and some of us had to sit on our hands, and so we wouldn't talk, and because we just wanted to jump right on in. And we asked them questions. And honestly, I have to admit, I was kind of hoping that magic would spill out of their mouths, and we would get a list. Here are the 10 things you do, and if you do those, then you're just going to grow. Do you think that happened? No. But I will tell you that it was magic that weekend. I have never prayed so much. Now, I'm from the Northwest, okay, where people are allergic to prayer out there. And heaven forbid you should say God. I'm a little quirky. I'm a known person, so I think they just kind of like, well, Tandi's a little touched. That's what she does. I love God. We have a big, awesome God, and I love God, and I'm not afraid to pray. And I was delighted to be with these 12 ministers from all over the association. I have never prayed more. I have never worshiped more. We would just like stop at the drop of a hat and say, you know what, we need to pray on this. And it could be a praise prayer. It could be a help me prayer. But there was this energy. What we found is the thing that made these 12 fantastic ministers tick, the thing that they had in common, they had a bold theology without apology. I learned a lot from them that day, I was changed. I was changed. So I thought to myself, you know what, I'm just going to be who I am, bold out in the world, and somebody's going to need that. And I'm going to be thankful that somebody else who has a different way of being in the world, slightly different theology or a radically different theology, is being bold with who they are in the world. Because when we are who we are in the world, and we allow other people, and we work to make sure everybody can be who they are fully in the world, then that world just tips toward goodness and justice. And I really believe that we pull each other into new stories, new ways of being. And so don't apologize for your theology. Just know that we're constantly growing, constantly changing. It's all good. It's all good. So these ministers had a theology without apology, very bold. They also knew what their congregation's saving message was. And it would pop out. Not only you could ask them and it would pop right out, but it would come out in examples over and over again as their story unfolded. I had somebody recently on, Stephen Jonasson and I have a blog called Growing Unitarian Universalism. And I just did a piece on discernment of saying before you go out and make your strategic plan manifest, do some deep thinking. Do some discernment. Really sit with, here are some questions. And I won't go into the questions. You can run to the blog and look at them. They're all there. But someone responded with, I asked, what is your saving message, is one of the questions. And someone wrote back, I knew it was coming. What do you mean your saving message? Saving from whom? Or what? And you're right, we don't have a great commission like the Christian faith does. What is our saving? What are we saving people from? I'll tell you. Saving from oppression, whether it be from the brain, the stories we tell ourselves, from real physical oppression, from that spiritual oppression, and it's certainly out there in our society, from those big cultural mucky things, consume, from having a meaningless, isolated life. So that saving message, I believe it really does transform lives. I'm transformed constantly. I am saved constantly by my faith. So that's what I'm talking about with the saving message. And then how are you showing that beyond your walls? How are you pulling people in? So they had bold theology, saving message, and they love their congregation where their congregation is, and all of our brokenness and quirkiness, and they love them into where the congregation is called to be. Not where the minister sees where the congregation needs to go. There were no shoulds about it. The ministers articulated over and over again that they were honored to walk with the congregation as the congregation found its ministry, its message, its purpose. And that so impressed me. That so impressed me, those three things. I want that for everyone. Now with the breakthrough congregations, we've got enough years under our belt that we can actually have some stats there. We can look at the data. You can, if you go online to the UUA.org website and you plug in breakthrough congregations, not only will they all come up by year, there's another button you can click and they'll come up by size, which I find really, really helpful. So if you have a congregation that has 100 members, you probably don't want to grab one of the congregations who are 700 and above to find out what are new ways that you could be doing church. Definitely look at them, but don't appropriate their governance structure and stuff like that. Not gonna work. Matter of fact, don't appropriate anybody's governance structure. I don't care if they're rock stars without thinking about, is this what will work for us, okay? Someone called the office and wanting to know what the stats were for all a certain size breakthrough congregations. They want to know what the budget was and what their stewardship stats were. And I always ask, what do you want to do with these numbers before I pass them on? And I will note also, I very rarely will pass those numbers on because what they want them for is not going to produce for them. Actually, quite the opposite. I find that numbers can be incredibly distracting. What the sweet person wanted to do, they really believed that if they took those stewardship numbers and they showed them to the congregation, that the congregation would just take out their checkbooks because a breakthrough congregation had those numbers, we'll write those checks too, and then we'll just grow. And bless his heart, he really believed that that would work. And so I said, okay, wait, let's back up a little bit. What's going on in your congregation? And by the end, it was a long, long conversation. And by the end of it, he realized that people wanted to give, they just didn't have the means, or it wasn't a priority, or they didn't see themselves within the congregation. So rather than showing them the numbers, the new strategy was to start some classes, offer some classes on financial management so that people could align their own budgets with their own values. The other strategy was to give people some more information, equip them to do better in the world, to have more choices, to be freer in the world. The other strategy that they started was investing in a big screen and a projector and some digital cameras. And they sent people out throughout the week to take pictures of what was going on in the congregation. They had pictures of what was going on in Sunday school. They had pictures of what was going on in the Paint Their City project. They had pictures of church life. And then 10 minutes before worship, they would have a musician playing some nice music, and the pictures would just come up during the time before worship. And then they started doing things like circle dinners. See Edith, picture of Edith, contact information for Edith. So it's circle dinners, name, contact information, face. So-and-so, here's the teacher teaching 4th grade, name, blah, blah, blah. So what happened was newer members came in and they hit the ground running because you could see we're visual. Most of Americans are visual learners, so you can use that. So what did, people started seeing themselves in church and started investing more in their religious communities. And I'm anxious. He asked for the numbers about a year ago, and I asked him to report back to see what kind of impact things made. But I did see from their newsletter that they indeed have a class going on. And they've got a class that happened in fall, and they've got another class that's happening in spring, so that tells me that it was wanted, so we'll see. But do you see what I did there? He was asking me for a technical fix, and we laid out what the assumptions were, reassessed the assumptions, then asked what do we need to learn in order to be different in the world, to come into the world in a new way. So it was an adaptive challenge is what it was. Now, the breakthrough congregations, when we analyzed them, again, I was looking for quick, here's the list of things to do from the breakthrough congregations. And what we found is the growth strategy for the breakthrough congregations across the board was to do church well. So, I always like a good framework. And the framework I like to use is from Lauren Mead, who does a lot of work around stewardship. Now, Lauren Mead wrote a book called Growth Beyond Numbers. Is that right? More Than Numbers, thank you. Growth, More Than Numbers. And I want to give kudos to his editor, who is the one who actually came up with the framework, minus association, and that's Tim Buckles. And I hold that up just because often the charismatic or the good writer is the one who gets the accolades, when in fact, everything like I've just told you today, those aren't my sole ideas. These are how we live into each other. We're all so interrelated. A lot of the ideas I get for the growth office come from your district and other districts and other really smart people. So again, we're interrelated. Okay, so Tim Buckles, Lauren Mead's work, that there are basically 4 kinds of growth, and we're going to add associational down here. There's numerical growth, organizational maturity. Oh, sorry for the people who. All right. Organizational maturity, spiritual vibrancy, incarnational or faith in action, and then associational. And associational came to me via Jan Gartner, who's in the credentialing office. Wicked smart person. Oh my goodness. But there was a buzz. As soon as she told me, I started hearing it all over the place. Other people were talking about this associational growth. Okay, so the numbers. As I said, numbers are just indicators. Just indicators. Don't get too excited about them. Matter of fact, I tell congregations, really rethink whether you need to do that survey. Probably not. I bet if you had real conversations with people, you'd get much better information. I find that surveys are distracting from doing the real work. And that's a good check also as you go in. Is what we're doing really what we're supposed to be doing? Or is it a distraction from the real work? Organizational maturity. So that's things like, does your budget reflect what the values are? Does the way that you treat staff reflect Unitarian Universalist values? Fair compensation is a religious imperative. Okay? Does the size of your board or the kind of your government, your governing policies, do those really fit your congregation? Someone asked, I heard, and I hear this a lot also, people will ask, was that a financial decision? The shrinking of a body, or the way that, going to policy governance rather than having a lot of different committees, or was that a financial decision? More often than not, your board, your governing people are so incredibly thoughtful. It's a stewardship question, not the finance, because stewardship isn't just the finance stuff. But if you've got finite resources, I hope you are constantly asking, is this the best use of our resources? Even if you are absolutely flush. I'm stunned. Okay, so I come from the Pacific Northwest, where we have no endowments. I take that back. I know 2 congregations who have endowments. Whereas in the Northeast, I don't know if do y'all have endowments down here too? Okay. Well, the Northeast, I did some consulting with them last year, and they're like, what should we do for our growth strategy? I said, give away your endowments, for goodness sake. Just go on the street corner and just hand out that money. Because what I saw them doing is they're using endowment, not all of them. Some of them are using their endowments to pay staff, and then they forget how to sacrifice themselves to create something larger than themselves. Those endowments, I just think that our ancestors must be going, oh my God, that's not what we had in mind when we set those up. I applaud the board for really looking at, are we being good stewards of our faith by holding on to old buildings? And I'm a history person, and I'm hugely sentimental. I love headquarters. I love going into that library and just sitting and thinking of all the different people who've sat around that table. But then I think of all the people yet to come, and what we could be doing with those resources, and those ancestors who are floating around the rooms, saying, get rid of the building. Run, run. Really, the congregations who are growing, there's a scrappiness about them. There's a nimbleness. And so think about where you get kind of, where you're getting kind of tired, or you're in the congregation, you're getting kind of lazy, or a little like, oh yeah, we don't have to worry about that. Yeah, you might want to look at that. What else? Oh, I also want to applaud your district for moving your nominating committee into a leadership development committee. And if you haven't done that in your own congregation, please do. Please do. I did a study, yes, I'm constantly doing studies. I did a study a couple years ago in my own congregation, or excuse me, in my own district. And I was curious about pathways to membership. Somebody had asked a question, and then I just kept stewing. So I took our growth numbers in the district for the last like 10 years, who was growing, who wasn't, and I color-coded it. Okay, you're green if you're growing even by 1 member, and you're gray if you aren't. And then I went through and did a quick survey and asked, what is your pathway to membership for each of the congregations? And it ranged from, oh, you just have to sign the book. And they seemed very proud of that. You know it's coming. Sign the book to you take a class, or you meet with the minister if there's a minister, or you take a class. One of the most intentional, and it wasn't a large congregation, it was a mid-sized congregation, they had separate pathways for if you were already a Unitarian Universalist from another congregation, you get this orientation. If you are brand new, you've never been, if you're in no religion, never been raised in a religion, here's an orientation. And if you come from another religion, here's an orientation. So there were like different pathways, different modules. Here's another one. If you were a leader in another congregation, then you get even some more attention. You know? How many of you are from congregations 100 and smaller? Oh, really? Okay, there's a ton of us out where I am. This is special to you. If you've got somebody who comes in from another congregation, a leader from another congregation, and they're really gung-ho about leadership, before you go, yes, come, be our president. Yeah, because that never happens, right? Right. Be cognizant of what size congregation that person came from. Out where I am, I've got a lot of our tiny, tiny congregations get so excited when somebody from a mid-sized congregation moves in and wants to be president and make a whole bunch of changes just like they had in their old church. And a lot of those skills are going to be really, really useful, but if they decide that size government, it's going to be different. So often we think, cultural misappropriation, where there's also size misappropriation, or we need a new word for that kind of norm misappropriation. Okay, so where was I going with that? Leadership, what? Size of congregation. Oh, you see, like I feel like you guys get me. Okay, good. Oh, the leadership identity. Yes, leadership identity. Oh, I know, membership, thank you. Sorry for the people at home, watching at home. Okay, so I have the growing, the growing congregations and the congregations in decline, and then I have the whole spectrum of kinds of membership. It could not have been more clear. It was freaky. I was hoping it was going to be clear, I was attached to this assumption, and it was. One of the times it was. So the congregations who were in decline were the just sign the books. I swear it was like crystal clear. Just sign the books. We're in decline. The ones who it was meet with the minister or meet with a religious educator or meet with somebody, but as the curve from what it meant, all the hoops you had to go through to be a member got higher, so did the growth. So I just want to hold that up. So think of, and there are mad resources out there as to how do you acculturate, how do you assimilate, how do you bring out the gifts of new members and help them walk that path. There's so many resources out there, not just on the internet. There's some great manuals. The Journey Toward Membership is a really good resource, but you also have congregations in your own district who are doing that really, really well. Do not hesitate to call somebody up and say, okay, can I see your resources on that? So that you get an idea of, you borrow resources. Don't totally take them hook, line, and sinker and just put your name on it, but the next one is spiritual vibrancy. And I was just talking with Sue Cinnamon the other day, and very pleased that she's doing this work in spiritual direction, because there's a trend I'm seeing. There's a conversation among some of our innovative ministers. They have the idea that what if we took some of the congregation's resources and hired a spiritual director to walk with our board of directors? Shoot, if my congregation said we're going to hire spiritual director to walk with our board of directors, I might consider serving on the board. What an opportunity. But the idea being to help the body that is holding the whole congregation, to help them understand how does leadership form their identity as a Unitarian Universalist leader, and how does their leadership experience inform their faith. So think about that. Out where we are, there's a big trend towards spiritual directors, and out where I am in the Pacific Northwest, we have congregations who hold spiritual directors on retainer, and so that you have access to your pastoral care team, you have access to small group ministry, and if you want to go deeper, then you have access to a spiritual director, and I love that trend. That can only serve us very well. One of the initiatives I have for my office will be gathering some, providing some resources so that boards can be an affinity group unto themselves and do small group ministry as leaders. So often, I don't know if any of you have, if you past presidents are on the board, so often I think there's a little crisis of faith or big crisis of faith that happens when you realize you get the dirty underbelly of the congregation. You're like, oh, I didn't really know that about so-and-so. Oh no, what do I do with that? Or all the wrestlings that can happen on the board. My heart goes out to you. That is really hard religious work. And so the idea of coming together to be an affinity group and do that small group ministry work together is one that I hope people will pick up and explore. Teaching is spiritual practice. I want to hold up the work of Annie Scott and of Carrie Kopnick out in the Northwest. They're religious educators who are consultants in our district who do support for teachers as spiritual practice. Now, how many of you have trouble recruiting teachers for your programs? It is, yeah, I'm surprised I don't see more, but someone might be going, I have no idea. You probably do. Excuse me. But I'm seeing this trend where religious educators will gather the teachers before class for like a prayer circle, who will have quarterly retreats so the teachers can unpack how does teaching inform their faith and how does their faith inform the teaching. They're covering things like being a spiritually mature, differentiated person. They're doing really cool things like taking a picture of themselves, pulling out a picture of themselves when they were the age of those students, and then posting it so the kids can see, in the room, oh, this is what your teacher looked like, and it can hold them kind of heart accountable to, oh, that's right, I remember what these kids are like. Really effective for youth advisors, I can attest to. Another area under spiritual vibrancy is I'm seeing a trend toward leaders coming to terms with what does it mean to be culturally competent, so that when you go out to build relationship, you're building relationship in the most intentional, respectful way that you can. And that's an area like sexuality is constantly changing in our world. Cultural competencies are constantly changing in the world. I've just been very, very keenly aware of that recently. Justice making a spiritual practice. I want to hold up the work of Deborah Holder in the Mountain Desert District. She has a whole paradigm called Beloved Community, and she is using small group ministry as a way to unpack why we do justice before you do justice, doing the justice, and coming back and asking, how does that form my faith? How does that form my identity? How have I shifted? So the justice becomes less a product and more of a process. Okay, the incarnational of faith in action. I highly recommend doing audits with each other, going and visiting other congregations, and how do you know that that congregation is Unitarian Universalist? Now, I'm not talking about the sign out front, but I'm talking about the way that you're greeted, the way, the order of service, the liturgy, the building. How do you know that the building is a Unitarian Universalist structure, the board? So where do you see that incarnation, the how do you see ourselves in action? And this question, I think, is one that we should ask ourselves constantly. At the end of the day, how will people have known that you were a Unitarian Universalist? And don't beat yourself up. That's process also. We are always growing. Associational. Who do you show up for? When I say associational, I'm not just talking about Unitarian Universalist Association. I'm talking about in the community. When you go out in the community, who do you show up for? I would love for us to be known as the religion that shows up in your community. When I work with congregations, I will often, when I work with congregations for a whole weekend, I will often take some time and go out into the community to the coffee shops and the bookstores, and I'll just say, hey, I'm working with the UUs. I don't even unpack that acronym. Curious if they know what that is. I'm working with the UUs. What can you tell me about them? And I'm known for this out in the Northwest now. And sometimes congregations will say, okay, we know that you do that. Please don't do that. We really don't want to know. Because they get nervous. They get nervous thinking, oh my gosh, especially if they're in a conservative area. And one of the congregations in Musco, Idaho, as you might imagine, a little bit conservative in that area. They're like, oh, Tandi, please don't do that. We don't need to know. I'm like, oh, yes, you do. So I go out, and I go out with the religious educator. She was so curious. She goes, I want to see this. So she would like hang back a little bit and watch me work. So I go into the first coffee shop, and they lit right up. They're like, oh yeah, my cousin's a Unitarian Universalist. When I said UU, he knew exactly what I was talking about. And so he's all excitedly, telling me how his cousin loves this. Go to the next place. Everybody had heard about the Unitarian Universalist Church and would tell me, when I would say, well, tell me about them, they would tell me about how, they sponsor this hunger walk, how they've got a quilting group, they knew all this stuff I was really surprised about. So we go to All Nations, which All Nations is the big evangelical, non-denominational church in town. Huge. They've got like different sites around town, kind of big church. And downtown they have a theater, big theater complex, and there's a coffee shop in front. I start to go in, and Ginger grabs me and goes, no, Tandi, I don't think, you do not need to go in there. I'm like, I'm just so curious, what's the worst that could happen? And so we go in, and I said, I'm working with the UUs, what can you tell me about them? They're like, oh my gosh, you were so lucky. Do you know, get this, their faith, they study all the world religions. Can you imagine? Not only do they study all the world religions, they don't have pews in their sanctuary. They have chairs so they can move the chairs out of the way, and they dance in their sanctuary. You can go by, and they name the different nights when they have programs. You can go by their church, and it's always lit, and all this music comes out. They have so much fun. This is the take on the evangelicals' conservative take on this little church. And there was such delight. And that occurred to me, too, that in our partnership, our faith can go where other faiths can't go. My heart is breaking for our Methodist cousins in faith right now who are really wrestling with our gays and lesbians, bisexuals, and transgendered welcome at our table. We don't have that. So we need to, I feel this obligation to go where my cousins in faith can't go and invite them along for the journey. And so here is a rather conservative group going, isn't that so cool? Yeah, it is so cool. It is so cool. And then I think, what kind of things are going on in the community that that congregation could be reaching out to All Nations and going, you know what, there is just too much work to do. Why don't we take back the schools together? Why don't we do something for foster care together? We don't have to agree on everything. There's too much work to do. There is too much work to do. So that's associational growth. So I hope you'll ask yourself at the end of the day, how will they have known I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and who do I show up for? When we join together, the odds toward goodness begin to multiply.